Yeah, let's begin.
All right, good morning, Hugo. Thank you very much for being here. For those of you who don't know who you are, could you very briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of a blockchain called Flare Network. Flare is based around scalable data provision. So I guess in short, we figured why not use a blockchain's decentralization properties to create data provision on-chain that is substantially more decentralized than existing methodologies.
Perfect, thank you very much. And could you briefly tell us what brings you to Singapore and why are we here at Token 2049?
So Singapore, this is our second year at Token 2049. It's a good conference. It's very institutional, which is slightly different to some of the other conferences, but it's probably one of the best in Asia.
I think so too, and we've been trying to figure out why it's called 2049. Have you got to the bottom of that yet?
I guess I haven't. It's sort of like Space Odyssey 2001, like a prediction for the future. But let's hope we get there by 2049.
Fingers crossed. So you said you've been here last year as well. What are your first impressions this year?
It's very busy, which is, I suppose, surprising given the market and some of the bearishness out there. It really doesn't reflect what you're seeing on crypto Twitter or CoinMarketCap. So that's quite nice. I suppose it's useful that it also coincided with East Singapore and just before that Korean Blockchain Week. So we've had the critical mass of people. There's apparently been some very, very good sort of speeches and presentations. Haven't been able to see too many of them yet, but it's pretty hectic.
I was just about to ask you about the presentations and the main stage and side events. Are you planning on going to any in the coming day if you haven't seen them yet so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly off to see Arthur Hayes later today.
Perfect. So what do you feel, just based on being here for the last 48 hours, what are the key narratives that are being discussed here this year at 2049?
So I guess, ZK rollups in general, layer 2s, machine learning more than, people call it AI, machine learning more than I've seen previously. Certainly that's one of the things we're interested in.
Perfect. And from being in Singapore, also in the past, why do you feel like it's very attractive to crypto startups?
So I think, when I've read about Singapore, I think it's pretty much the premier crypto hub in Asia, maybe even in the world. I think it has really fantastic market penetration in terms of being able to get people to come here from all of Asia. Lots of people left China, left Hong Kong, left Indonesia and those kind of places, and Korea, of course, and came to Singapore to set up their businesses. I think, like we're seeing in Dubai now, the authorities here have a sensible regulatory policy. They're quite, they take a fast view in terms of being able to execute, and that's very useful for being able to set up a business with some level of certainty.
And speaking of that certainty, do you think in the coming years or months you'll be setting up offices here as well and having operations based out of Singapore?
No, we're based in Dubai.
And you're going to stay in Dubai for the foreseeable future? Very well. So given all the reasons why Singapore is an attractive hub, do you feel that other places in Asia or around the world will be emerging as crypto hubs in the coming months and years?
Absolutely. I'd certainly say the GCC has emerged as a crypto hub and probably will get stronger from there. I suspect Singapore will remain the preeminent in Asia.
And if you had to put your finger on 3 potential crypto hubs that we should keep an eye out on, what would you say?
I have no idea, but maybe Dubai. I would probably say Bahrain at some point, and I would assume somewhere will crop up in South America.
Fair enough. We'll be keeping an eye out on South America as well. Thinking of the sort of more distant future, perhaps, what do you think the key narratives that emerge from conferences like Token 2049 and beyond are going to be that shape the next bull run?
I think obviously there's a lot of macro bound up in that, and there's some people talking about the macro. But I think, people are talking about, specifically we've seen loads of layer 2s launch, right? I think we still have a mismatch between underlying tooling and applications and usage. I don't think that's a new phenomenon. We probably have more infrastructure projects than there is desire to actually use them. And I think these conferences need to start thinking start moving away from just the underlying tech and into, okay, so what are the use cases that take us beyond our existing user base, which is relatively small.
We're going to get onto use cases in just a second, but for now, why do you feel that it's important for Flare Network that it remains a standalone L1 instead of just being a roll-up or a sidechain, for instance?
Sure. So we need that level of decentralization in terms of being able to do scalable data provision, which means we need to have our own validators. A sidechain is a possible thing, but then you have to be allied to one particular network or another. A roll-up would be harder because they're much harder to decentralize.
And we're going to get back to use cases now. So we just heard Sam Altman on the main stage. He was talking about use cases because one of the main criticisms, I think, from external to crypto is that crypto use cases are still sort of in the exploration stage. Can you tell me a little bit about your approach with Flare Network to crypto use cases?
So obviously we're, I guess, trying to run a broad gamut of what can be use cases. This is why our kind of data first thesis is sort of where we've pitched ourselves, because we think that blockchain as a ledger is great. Blockchain with computation and a ledger is fantastic, but you need to be able to access data from external to the chain in a essentially as low cost way as possible. If it's expensive, like the existing incumbent oracles, that's not going to allow scaling. And really, we think that the future is about allowing people to build dApps that have access to as much data as possible so that they're useful. So we think that obviously we're starting in DeFi. We think there's a lot of possibilities in gaming, a lot of possibilities in tokenization, and a lot of possibilities in machine learning, specifically around data.
Perfect. And interoperability is another hot topic that emerges at conferences like this one and DeFi more generally. How is Flare Network improving interoperability?
So on Flare, one of our core protocols is the ability to prove what has happened from another chain onto Flare using our decentralized set of validators. That gives you a level of interoperability which other applications can then plug into to improve that interoperability.
And to that point, can you talk very briefly about how you're specifically ensuring network security and governance, for instance?
So the token has two roles. It's obviously a utility token, it pays for fees, and it has a governance role which allows people to use the token to vote. So that is sort of the core token aspect, and we're just moving to a staking model so that each validator is staked, and in order to provide data, they must be staked. They must have their own stake, and they must have stake from external parties.
Do you think that that's conducive to bringing more people into the space or creating an environment where more dApps can be built?
I think by having security, that's conducive to having more dApps and more users.
And talk to me about the near future. What are the plans that you have going on at Flare that really excite you?
So we are working pretty heavily on what the nexus between machine learning and blockchain. That's probably where I find my most exciting sort of elements. And then obviously gaming is quite interesting because traditionally crypto games have been pretty poor user experience. I think that games are always going to end up being run off-chain, but being able to prove data from a game onto chain and to allow people to either monetize it or to allow for people to receive goods from the game on chain, which as NFTs is probably very interesting. But the problem is games require the ability to prove a very large amount of data. You may have 10,000 events in a particular gameplay session. It's very hard to do that on with a traditional Oracle model.
Very good. And let's talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape, because the US and Europe's coming under a lot of pressure at the moment from regulators. It's perhaps not to the same extent in Asia. How have you experienced regulatory constraints recently, and what are your plans for navigating it in the near future?
I mean, we're looking to be compliant under the European rules, and also considering being registered under VARA in Dubai. The regulator here is famed for being, sensible and well considered in their approach. I think that's why there's so many people here. The US and Europe, I'm quite pleased that they did actually put in place what looks to be a sensible regime. We'll see how it gets executed. The US, of course, is a basket case when it comes to crypto, and doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon, for obvious reasons. It's a threat to them.
Definitely makes it interesting to spectate from the sidelines, though.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in a few words, where do you see Flare Network in 5 years from now?
I suppose we're hoping to have developed some, unique and interesting use cases. We are, of course, DeFi focused today. I would like Flare to be used for things substantially outside of DeFi, as I think that's where the further adoption will come. I don't see the majority of the population really caring about managing their money in an LP pool. I don't think that's the main application for blockchain, in its terminal use case.
And just before we let you go, what projects, events, or developments should the people that are watching this keep an eye out for in the coming months?
I think hackathons is where we'll probably get a chance to showcase the technology we've been building for 5 years. I think that's where we're putting most of our chips.
Perfect. And where can people follow along with the developments of Flare Network?
So on Twitter @Flare Networks and our website flare.network.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.